Well, this is indeed a great pleasure to see all these people here at once. I was trying to take a poll if there was anybody here older than I am, even though I was probably one of the youngest ones to ever meet. Well, I know Jane, yeah. And I'm 77, so anybody that's over that. So. But I've known Sellers for 60 years, I guess, 60-some years. And Jane and I used to take little rides in the back of her parents' car. And I met Mr. Sellers actually in Rockford, Illinois, back when I was 15 years old. And that's when I considered myself converted. I hate to admit it, but I used it as a reason I didn't have to go to church. So we all stayed at home. Everybody's complaining we didn't go to church. Oh, we don't have to go to church. One story was the minister came over and talked to my dad, and he says, he doesn't have to go to church. He knows enough already. So, anyway, appreciate Rusty. Where's Rusty? He welcomed me to this conference, and then I've had exchanges with Nathan, and he's arranged this very conveniently for me. So I do appreciate all the help everyone's given. You'll find what I'm going to talk about is probably quite a bit different. It doesn't have anything to do with, at this point, with Acts 28:28. It does have a lot to do with the kingdom. And it's really using my background in engineering, system engineering, trying to apply it in a scientific way to a field of theology. And I must say, as far as Mr. Sellers, I believe he was the most underrated, unknown, unrespected, and I think Mildred, his mother, said, Jane's mother, he's also the most underpaid theologian, biblical theologian, scholar of the 20th century. I truly think if there were a Nobel Prize given out for theology, Mr. Sellers should receive it, because I know of no one who discovered the dispensation of grace and the kingdom as we talk about it anywhere. And I don't know anyone else that talks about it. So it's very, very, but it's so true. And so what I want to do is take a scientific approach and say, all right, I'll be a doubter. Can I prove to myself that this is really a bona fide concept? Is it the best view? In science, we usually do experiments, and that's where you prove something. But many things you can't do experiments with. So what you do is a scientific approach to look for the best of the available alternatives. And that's really what we do in something like solving crimes, or so many things. You try to find the best answer. You aren't going to be able to repeat what happened in a lab. You have to make the best alternative, and that's going to stand for a scientific approach. So I titled this originally The Problem, but then I tried to sell it as a book, so I thought mystery would be more intriguing, so I put the word mystery. And you notice the title is The Mystery of the Kingdom of God, and the solution is the systems analysis approach. Now, it's a mystery because do you know anyone outside of ourselves who think we know what, when, and where is the kingdom of God? A lot of people have ideas, and but I don't know, I think it's kind of one of those amorphous terms that it can kind of mean anything you want it to mean when you're talking to anybody, and just mostly a feel-good thing. So the mystery is that. And the solution, that's where I got involved, is in coming up with 10 systems analysis steps. The first two doesn't really matter what order I take them in. The rest of them have to go in a pretty specific order or we won't get the right answer. And the book that I wrote by that title is really condensed from the larger book that, is it Lukens here, Mr. Luke? Yeah. Who actually read the whole thing. And I believe Bob over here read it too. Yeah. And they said it was a great book for scholars or somebody, but pretty hard for the layman. And so I said, well, I think I tried to capture everything Mr. Seller ever wrote in that book and more. And then, but from it, I was able to derive a couple of smaller books that were more readable, and the one on hell and the one here on the kingdom. So, first two steps. Is there anyone here who would disagree of these being important to understanding the kingdom of God? Many people, besides Mr. Sellers, have identified the kingdom as the theme of the Bible, so that's supported. And I say again, the book chapters give a lot of information to support these statements. And of course, we do believe in this method of dispensationalism, which is one of the finest methods anyone's ever used to try and figure out why the Bible may seem to contradict itself in different portions. Mr. Sellers was accused of being a hyper-dispensationalist. I don't know if I wouldn't say that. I think he was just about right. So what I do first, being a scientist, psychologist, whatever, the first thing is you go read the literature. Now, you see number 21 tucked away down there. That's the Sellers body of literature. I had read that body of literature. However, when I read, and somebody asked me today if I'd ever read all 20 of these books, I read as many of them as I could get a hold of, and I've read a great deal of synopses of a couple of them, like the one on Eastern religion. I pushed it as far as I could possibly push it, and they still use the word kingdom. And I found out of those 20 books, there's a lot of views on the kingdom. A lot of them are similar, a lot of them are dissimilar. But for some reason, not a single one of them, except one, mentioned anything close to what Mr. Sellers taught. And that was Pentecost. He actually mentions there'd be no way to fulfill all the prophecies in the millennium. From what we know, there must be some kind of small little thing, before the millennium. But he doesn't go into any detail at all. So I at least give him some credit that someone else has recognized that. Oops, I knew I'd do that. I don't know how far I went. I think I went way too far.
You just use that roller ball in the middle of back.
Oh, I'm going way, yeah. Okay, where was I? That was it.
You were on
There you go. Okay. There
Aha. Well, I missed this. Are any of you have background in safety engineering or anything like that? We have a thing in safety engineering, analyzing airplane crashes, nuclear power plant meltdowns, chemical explosions, a thing called cluster analysis. It's where you try to, there are so many things out there to look at. How do we put them in any meaningful chunks to study one by one? And so I use cluster analysis to look at these 21 views and came up with, after careful analysis, I found that 7 major views on the kingdom would incorporate the best that any of these views had to say. Now this is just a figure diagram, but there are the 21 views can be reduced to 7 major views. And so really, instead of looking at 21 and looking at, we can just look at 7, and we're still very safe that we're in the ballpark. And these are the 7 views. The eternal state, something like heaven, or some immortal state of being. Christ the person, organized Christian church, spiritual within you, and I've got to say that is probably the most popular thing and the most difficult one to get rid of, because it's all gas, as C.S. Lewis says. How do you get rid of that? Future millennium, the future pre-millennium, which would be Mr. Sellers' view, and then dual kingdoms, a view where we can combine number 4 and number 5 and capture it all. Does anyone have a problem just from the titles of kind of getting a feeling for what those stand for? I think so. So to approach this, I decided to use what we would call a matrix analysis. I wanted to see, first of all, how many facts. I just picked 10 because 10 is really nice even number. And if I could find 10 discrete facts that would define a kingdom of any kind, at least, a biblical kingdom of any kind, and see how many of these 7 views, how many of these 10 kinds of facts would they fit. And the meaning of a kingdom, Mr. Sellers had put in there, you don't really have a kingdom at all. It really came from the word basilia, I think, meaning government. And I think it was like Pentecost again said, a kingdom defined in the King James time it really was a government, but they thought of a kingdom. A kingdom had to have a realm, and it had to have subjects, and it had to be able to exercise some kind of authority over the subjects. That, in the smallest way we can say, is a kingdom. So how many of those views really are a kingdom of any kind? We know the Old Testament Israelites from David on expected an earthly kingdom. The New Testament Israelites also. They didn't have to explain when Jesus said kingdom is near, or when John the Baptist said this. They knew that they were expecting a Messiah, and they expected to rule the earth, and expected the kingdom to be then. Jesus had a lot of kingdom parables. There's Isaiah 17. He tells specifically to the disciples in secret, which give more information about the kingdom than what they might know otherwise. Jesus said the kingdom was near. He also said it was within you. I'm not questioning these things at this point. I'm just saying these are facts that people could pull. The promises have not occurred in any major way. Some people got some of them, Israelites got some, but then they all went away after Acts. A lot of parables talk about the kingdom being like a growing process. Mustard seed, a very important one in Mark about the growing grain. Biblical prophecies do require God taking kingdom control of the earth, because everything's going worse and worse. All the predictions are, I don't care what they are, it's not getting better. And God's covenants with Israel, there are a number of covenants, Act 4 of them, that no matter how bad the Israelites are, they're still supposed to happen. They're unconditional. And so it's not dependent on behavior, they're something unconditional. So in a way, the kingdom is going to come whether they're good or bad, based on that. So if I put these together, and there's something like, what's 10 times 7? 70 cells, if you have a matrix. And I got 36 hits. And if you do a matrix of the 70 cells, and little black dots could appear on 36 of them. Well, these are the 36. And you'll notice that some views have none, some have one, several have all 10 Bible facts. So that gives us some hope. To summarize here, no kingdom facts supported views 1 and 2. Only 1 supports view 3. 5 support view 5. Sorry, this thing. And 10 support views 5, 6, and 7. So the conclusion is, of the 7 major views, 3 can be eliminated for lack of kingdom fact support. So I'm gradually shifting down. There's got to be something to support these views, or they get eliminated. And these are the 4, and I've been very generous to number 4 because it only got 5 facts. The other 3 got 10 facts, but on the other hand, the other 3 got 1 among 3 views. So I think we can, and plus this is such a popular view, I didn't want to get rid of it. Okay, now this is the most confusing chart of all, and no one could possibly interpret it, but I want to get everything on there. Bob knows all about this because he read all 135 verses in my appendix, and he found out where I didn't reference them in the main body and how I should tie them all together. But this was a pretty tough thing to do. I got everything I mentioned. I didn't try to be biased about what they meant. I just said, what does it say? And I'm really looking for earthly versus spiritual kinds of things. I'm looking for when, near, now, future. And then I had some information on who and how. And those are the characteristics. For example, Matthew, where the kingdom of heaven is at hand, John the Baptist said it. Obviously, he expected to be an earthly kingdom. When? It's at hand, it's near. And who's he talking to? The Israelites. The kingdom of God is within you. Here's Jesus says, when it comes, it will be within you. This supports the spiritual view, and it could apply near, now, in the future. It doesn't say if it's within you forever, anyone that comes along. But really, Jesus is saying how it comes, not so much when it comes. And then the bottom chart here is just showing a summary of how all the near, now, and future events played out. You notice we found no verses that really said much about now. They're all near, future, and you can combine things near and future, and you can combine things near, now, and future. So there's really only 4 of those that talk within the verses about the time. So forgetting that chart, which was very confusing, and looking at the idea that we looked at 135 verses, what could one find? And by the way, does anybody know how to say exegesis? Exegesis? That, you know, that word when we study things biblically and try to figure them out.
Exegesis?
Exegesis. Okay. This is really what this is. Don't know how to say it, but and I call it a compatibility or comparability analysis. We're really comparing biblically and scientifically in that sense, because those are the things that are used by people to try and get consistency. I know we found 188 verses, 88%, clearly pertain to an earthly kingdom. 16 verses, that's 12%, could be interpreted as a spiritual kingdom. But all 16 verses could also be interpreted as an earthly kingdom. That's where a lot of effort is spent in using Mr. Sellers' background, saying, even though it sounds spiritual, could it be earthly? Now, if we go the other way, if it sounds earthly, it can't be spiritual. You just can't argue those things. They just sound earthly. How do we make them into spiritual? So most of those are cast aside, and theories are built totally on the spiritual side. When? Most of the verses, 90%, can be interpreted as following to the future, although many of those future verses also apply to near and now. No verses apply to now alone or now in combination with near and future. That was that little chart I showed you before. It's not overwhelming, but it kind of gives you the idea there's not much being said about what's happening now. And so we will, frankly, why the spiritual view is so important, it fills in that blank. Rather than going to the dispensation of grace to understand it, they go to a spiritual view of the kingdom in everybody's minds, very vague, it can be anything you want, and that fulfills these past 2,000 years with something. And 10% of the verses clearly do apply to near only, like the kingdom is near. I always wonder about that. Well, the kingdom did start with miracles and all kinds of things up through the Acts period. So that part, the starting, was near, but the entire thing hasn't been finished. So in my view, view 4 can also be limited for now as the best view. It's going to come up again. It's very tough to get rid of, but it is not the best view because it's a very minority view as far as presented in the Bible. So step 8, we go back to, so far I've covered 3 types of systems analysis. I've covered a cluster analysis, a matrix analysis, comparability analysis. Now I'm back to another matrix analysis. And here we try to look at the critical characteristics of the kingdom as predicted by prophecy. I pulled these from, I don't know from where they're discussed at great length, but they're all different. They all different meanings, and in particular, some things are a little significant. For example, number 4 here, Israel stored, David is king. Almost no one teaches that David is king in the kingdom. It's Jesus comes back in the millennium, and Jesus is on the throne, and they think this is just kind of a hyperbole of something. But nobody tries to explain it without a pre-Advent condition. Elijah returned. A lot of these we hear. Educational program. Jeremiah talks about that. Where would we have an educational program after the millennium where everyone gets destroyed who does not know God. They would have to already have had some kind of educational program, or they're just gone just because they don't know. And I had to use two charts to cover all 18. We throw in Paul's last days, which some people confuse with tribulation. And then Jesus' personal presence comes here at the very end. And when I did these, you said I can just go back one? I did all 18. You see, I just did the matrix here. This would be 18 times 3. What's that? That's the number of cells. Here I've got almost nothing happening in the past, almost nothing happening now, and it turns out almost nothing happening in the millennium too. So, if we really look at these, we see 18 major prophecies have not been fulfilled in the past, and with a couple of possible exceptions, they're not being fulfilled today either. Only 5 of the major prophecies for the future could readily be assigned to the millennium. One for sure, Jesus has to come. There's 4 others that could be, I argue later, that they are really continuations of the pre-advent. They don't originate in the millennium, but if one just want to argue the millennium covers it, yeah. And then I got 6 possibles and 7 that absolutely could not be fulfilled. Well, if you got 7 out of 18 that cannot be fulfilled, that view is not very significant or powerful to me. Cannot fulfill more than 60% of the kingdom prophecies, therefore rejected. Now, what's that leave us with? Everybody keeping track? We've got 6 and 7 left. I kept in order. All right, let's jump past 6 and look at 7. 7, the dual view, can be eliminated because it requires both views 4 and 5. If you eliminate any one, either 4 or 5, you have nothing. So I don't have to go into it any more depth. But why does it exist? Why do 15 of those 21 references in some way or another accept the dual view as well as other things? But they accept it because, as I said before, they can't figure out what to do with what's happening now. So it kind of gives the spiritual view then another opportunity. They can say, well, whatever we have is spiritual, and everything else is in the millennium. So by having both of them, they think they've captured it. And there's so many books saying, well, we've captured everything now because we've got put these views together, and that's what it is. Even though nobody really talks about it, such as C.S. Lewis calling these views pretty much gas. So, I did change that last one before I came because I had thought I could eliminate it just by eliminating view 4, but really it said view 4 is so tricky that you can sneak back in there. So, but by eliminating 5, eliminating that the prophecy part can't work, we've got one of the components for sure that can't work, so it doesn't matter how you combine them. It's eliminated. That leaves us only with view number 6, the pre-advent view. And if I look at the unique characteristics of the pre-advent dispensation, we see that almost all, if you combine millennium and pre-advent, almost all those 18, only one could not be performed by the number 6, because that's when Christ comes. So our conclusion is, pre-advent is clearly the best view of the kingdom. Number 1, it's the only view to satisfactorily explain all 135 verses on the kingdom. Number 2, it's the only view to provide explanation for prophecies not possible in the kingdom. And finally, it's the only view remaining after system analysis 10 steps. Again, other than ourselves, which may be redundant, if I'm going to go to someone who doesn't already believe what we have, and they go through this, I'm hoping that Well, if you're a scientist and you believe in it, then show me the method that shows me your view is better. So the solution to the mystery of the kingdom of God is what? The kingdom of God is a dispensation, administration, where God rules both nature and people on earth. When? It will appear at the end of the current administration of grace. And where? It will be on earth, whereas God's will is done as in heaven. So with that, we now can do the last step of this analysis. Well, what is the kingdom more specifically? Well, we can take those 18 prophecies and we can list which one probably occur in the pre-Advent administrations, and then what happens as a result of that in the millennium. And you notice that pre-Advent has something to say everywhere except the last two. That's because we believe Paul's last days will have occurred before the pre-Advent condition. And number 18. And finally, I don't know, I know Mr. Selzer produced milestones and stages. This one was mine, borrowing from that. And I may not add anything other than I put these lost dispensations going from the first book. And we have go from prophecy, heralded in part, to suspended, resumed, fulfilled. Again, I say to those who have followed Mr. Seller's ministry, this is a rehash. But to those who know nothing about it, and even to ourselves to reinforce how strong scientifically this idea is. I mean, God has given us a method. Christianity gave us science. So he's given us a method to prove things as well as understand things. Often we don't use that to prove the Bible, the words themselves prove them, but in this instance, I believe the scientific approach was able to prove that the kingdom is as we believe. So I thank you much.